We have a real treat tonight. We have, our talk is on Dr. Marion C. Palmer, and we have Ellen Palmer Douglas and Stratford Marion Douglas here, two grandchildren, to present this talk. I don't want to take but a moment of their time, but I do want to say I've been excited about telling a key part of Tryon's medical history. Tryon has had an amazing number of medical practitioners over the years. I really believe it's almost like I say with architects. I think we've had more per capita probably than just about any town you could find. I was interested in something Mark McCall told me just before the program. I didn't realize, and I hope I'm not stealing any of your thunder, Strat, but I didn't realize that Dr. Palmer and Dr. McCall Sr., when he first set up shop here in 1940, shared office space. Dr. Palmer had been around for a long time then, in 1940, and he was going to be here for some more years. At any rate, this is an integral part of the story. We may be talking more about medical history in the future. I think we will be, but this was a good way to kick it off. I think probably everybody in the room knows some member of the Douglas family. A lot of you know all of them. Very talented group of people. All have made great contributions to this town, and they're grandchildren of Dr. Marion C. Palmer. I just want to put in a little plug before I turn it over to Strat on our membership campaign, which we're getting started. If you would like to be a museum member, and I'm sure all of you would, we are offering 2026 rates. We're having a rate increase the first of the year. I don't think that will surprise anybody too much, but the good news is we can sign you up today for a very substantial discount. You've got the rates that we have had in force for several years now, and take advantage of some savings. We need to get the community even better invested. Where you're invested well, or you wouldn't be here. But I think that history can be its own reward. That's the first purpose of belonging to the museum, and we can tell you about others. But I'm not going to take any more of the Douglas's time. Strat, are you going to lead it off?
I lead.
Okay, I'll give you Stratford Douglas. Follow that.
Well, the first thing you always know, and I always want to know in a history lecture is, does the narrator have any credibility? And, Marion Sharini, that's how you pronounce it in South Carolina, Sharini. Marion Sharini Palmer died in 1958. In 1950, I was born in 55. Ellen was born right around then. But anyway, we basically, at the time of his death, we basically looked like this. And, and so, shouldn't trust that. That's his great-great-granddaughter, by the way. All right, so we don't have much credibility, is my point. And instead, so I'm going to rely on the words of Seth Vining Sr., who was the founder and the editor of the Tryon Daily Bulletin for so many years. And in 1948, he wrote this bit in praise of my grandfather, and I kind of used it as an outline for this talk. He is the dean of our medical profession here, and has been a family doctor for hundreds of people for more than a quarter of a century. And recall, he's writing this 10 years, he was still alive at this time. He pioneered in medical work when visits to many of his patients in the mountains had to be made on horseback. He invited other doctors here in order to meet the needs of the people. He helped organize the Tryon Hospital and was its superintendent until it was necessary to build St. Luke's. He served as county health officer, on hospital staff, and as consultant on many important medical problems, and has done these numerous kindly deeds, which all doctors have noted, But in addition to his medical services to the community and county, he has been forward-looking in developing the civic and business interests of the community. He was first to see the possibilities of a lake, where Lake Lanier is now. He has been a progressive farmer and cattle raiser and sought to improve farming conditions in this section. He was one of the chief organizers and directors of the new Thermal Belt Telephone Company, which is planning to improve and grow the section. Served his church as a vestryman, country club as president, the Rotary Club as president, the town government as commissioner. Chamber of Commerce and numerous other groups have had the benefits of his leadership, time and money. He's intensely loyal to his friends, faithful to his course of activities, a regular fellow for hunting, golf, baseball, or any other activity that builds fellowship and friendships among fellow citizens. He's a key man in the community which he has served so well. I'm going to go through a brief timeline of his life, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to talk about his medical contributions, and then I'm going to come back on and talk about his business and his and kind of his character and his role in the community. So he was born in Pinopolis, South Carolina in 1884, 1 year before Tryon was born, so they kind of grew up together. His father, Peter Pache Pama, or Pama as they say in South Carolina, was a farmer and station master at Woodruff, South Carolina. Granddaddy graduated medical college in South Carolina in Charleston in 1910. He worked his way through medical school as a telegrapher, no doubt the skills that he learned at the train station. Came to Tryon in August 1910, and he courted Bertha Lee Bailey, who was from Wadmalaw Island, South Carolina, and she came up to Saluda, as many people in the Low Country did in those days. And he rode the train to see her in the afternoon. He was one of the early users of the Saluda Grade Trail. He would hike back in the evening to Tryon. He was married in 1912, had 4 children, Marion Jr., Bertha, my mother, Mary Palmer, Douglas, who was Mary LaRoche, who's there on the doctor's right, and Peter, who died tragically in his first year of life of pneumonia. He was in the military during World War I. He served in the Canal Zone as a doctor. That's Ellen helpfully put an arrow there so you can see him. He returned to Tryon in 2019. And with Dr. Jerby, he co-owned the Tryon Infirmary, and he co-founded St. Luke's Hospital in 1929. He took on debt to purchase the control of Thermal Belt Telephone Company in 1957, but he owned a fair piece of it before that and was part of the organization of it. He died in 1958 and is buried in the Tryon cemetery off of Markham Road. Now I'm going to let Ellen pick up. Let me go ahead and, yeah, I got your slides. You want me to go ahead and?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Very good. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Dr. Robert Palmer and, I wanted to thank Dr. Robert Palmer and his wife Alice. Are they here tonight? They were planning to come, but I don't see them. So they are neighbors of mine, and they sat down with us one evening, and they shared memories that they had of my grandfather. Dr. Bob was, as we called him when we were growing up, he was a distant cousin of Granddaddy. Both of them were Palmers of South Carolina, and there are a lot of Palmers in South Carolina, I will tell you this. Another one, very briefly, was first cousin Dr. Lassane Smith, who started the baby hospital in Saluda, and that's the last time I'm going to speak of Dr. Smith. And they met, but Dr. Bob and my grandfather first met in 1955, and then he came to join my grandfather in his practice in the last year of Granddaddy's life. Anyway, we're thrilled to have that connection through him to our grandfather. So, to go back to what Strat was just saying about when my grandfather came to Polk County, Mom wrote up an account about him in the Polk County history book that you can find in the Lanier Library and maybe other places in the early 1980s. And she says, in the summer of 1910, Dr. Palmer, who was 26 years old and just graduated from med school, he stepped off the train in Tryon. He climbed on Mr. Stern's log cabin inn wagon, and he rode it to the inn on top of White Oak Mountain. He liked the area, and very soon he started to practice medicine in Tryon. And I think that was a huge understatement on the part of my mother. I'm thinking about him going up to the top of White Oak, and probably all of you have been up there, and you know that incredible view up there. You've got Tryon Mountain right here, and then the mountains that loop on over towards Hogback. And it's just a beautiful scene there, and I imagine he probably also hiked to the top of Tryon Peak, and maybe he went to Sunset Rock, and there you can see the other part of the county, out towards the Green River Cove, Hulbert's Cove, out towards Brights Creek, out towards the area that's now Lake Adger and Lake Lure, which of course didn't exist in 1910. But I think that he looked at all of that, and he must have fallen in love with it. This young man from the Low Country. He had decided to be a country doctor, and all of this was his country. And he got to know all that country in his practice. He went from Cooper's Gap over to, all over the whole place. Pea Ridge out to Dark Corners to Saluda, the whole thing. It was a rural practice. And from Mom's account, she says transportation in 1910 was horse and buggy, horseback, and often hiking into the mountains to see his patients. He told one time of going to deliver a baby in the Pea Ridge area, a trip that then was probably several hours because it was dirt road. You know it takes a while to get there from Tryon, even these days. The baby was born around dawn, and on the return trip, he gave his horse, Nancy, her reins, and he slept all the way back in his horse. So he saw a lot of Polk County from horseback and saw patients all over the county, and he came to know love in every corner of it. This is a road I'm pretty sure he must have ridden on. It's part of Swiftwater Farm out near Sunnyview, and it's part of the old road that went from the Mill Springs area out to Cooper's Gap. Is that? Yeah, thank you. And I was able to hike there a few weeks ago, and it was just so lovely, and I just had goosebumps thinking that my grandfather used to ride on that road. So when he arrived in Tryon, there were 4 or 5 other doctors at the time out in Green Creek. Landrum, there were Doctors Walden and Christopher. Dr. Grady was already in Tryon practicing. And Dr. Bell, he was the doctor in Green Creek, according to my mother. Mom told a story about one time when Dr. Bell and my grandfather were standing around talking, I guess maybe in Mill Spring, I don't know. And a man came galloping up on a mule, and he didn't even stop, and he said, "Doc, I put turpentine on my poison ivy all over me. Is it going to kill me?" And together they said, "No," and he kept right on riding. So that was the kind of consultation you had. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of treatments or the kind of illnesses that he addressed in his practice. We have a few communications from the early part of his practice, mostly having to do with patients with respiratory diseases like tuberculosis or asthma or bronchitis. He had a patient referral. Let me see if I can do this. This is not, okay. He had a patient referral from a doctor in Charleston. The doctor's name was Dr. Alan Jervey, so hold that in your head for a few minutes. Who was on Meeting Street in Charleston. This is December 1915. And the patient that he was referring to my grandfather was DuBose Hayward, who of course later would come to write the book Porgy and then collaborate with the Gershwins on Porgy and Bess. But at this point, Hayward was not well known, but he did come to Tryon to recover from some kind of respiratory disease, and he was under my grandfather's care. Let's see, some other ailments from his records then, and not just then, but throughout the next couple of decades, included tonsillitis, which often came up in his files. Of course, back then they didn't have antibiotics, and so if you had strep throat, it could lead to very serious diseases like rheumatic fever, kidney problems. And so he often recommended tonsillectomies. I saw a lot of tonsillectomies in his files. And in fact, Mom used to tell us about how he removed her tonsils, but not in the hospital. He put her up on his examining table in his office, and he came after her with his clippers. And I always had this dreadful image in my head of your father coming at you with his clippers. Some other conditions that he addressed were dementia precox, which is known now as schizophrenia, chronic appendicitis, nerves, and hysteria. Not just in women. I know it was diagnosed a lot in women, but I saw one example of a man who had hysteria. Kind of an outlier was chlorine gas release that happened at the Southern Mercerizing plant, which is just on the edge of Tryon, just before the state line. And this was in February of 1933. I think from what my grandfather wrote about it, it sounded like Dr. Grady was the first one on the scene. And what they did was they put all the affected men, there were 10 or 12 men working in the plant, and they put them in a closed room, and then they exposed them to ammonia gas to neutralize the chlorine, which sounds horrible, but anyway. So that was one issue that he needed to address. He worked with patients from all walks of life. He wrote about this man for an insurance claim. He said, I examined him and he has chronic tonsillitis. He needs a tonsillectomy. Flat feet, which seriously interfere with his occupation as a farmer. And he gives a history of chronic appendicitis. So he had several of these things I mentioned. So he worked with farmers. He also worked with plant workers, with carpenters, and all kinds of laundresses, all kinds of folks from the area. And he worked with people of means as well, who would come to Tryon to recover from nerves and TB and that sort of thing. And of course, you know that Tryon had become by that time a place where people came for the cure. It was known for its good climate and fresh air and that sort of thing. And so a lot of people came here from different parts of the country, Florida, I think I saw, New Jersey, Illinois, Chicago, that sort of thing. Some of the regimens that he prescribed for these illnesses that he was dealing with, well, for respiratory ailments, it was usually rest and fresh air. And then he had a lot of recommended diets. For example, let me see. Control page. Oh, look at that. Okay, so this is from 1933. This is a buttermilk and orange juice diet. He seemed to have been big on this. I saw this mentioned more than once. So the patient seems to be in danger of a stroke from high blood pressure. And so what he did is he put him in bed for 2 weeks. And when he woke up, he was to alternate drinking a glass of buttermilk or a glass of orange juice at 2-hour intervals throughout the day. As time went on, he could get up and exercise a little bit, but he had to be back in bed by 8 o'clock at night. So like I say, I saw it more than once. In fact, one patient that he treated in this way was really enthusiastic about this diet. And he had been in Tryon, and then he went off to New York City for something, but he wrote back to my grandfather. And he said, I'm eating 12 to 15 California oranges per day, and I'm drinking 1 quart of buttermilk. I have not missed a single day, he says. To this I've added 2 slices of graham toast and a cup of coffee for breakfast, and 2 slices of graham toast in a bowl of hot milk, or 2 boiled Irish potatoes for supper. Nothing extra at noon. No liquor, of course, he says. And then he says, I attached a list of vegetables that I like. Will you please scratch out any you do not want me to have and mail the same back to me? And in the meantime, until I hear from you, I will continue to stick almost exclusively to buttermilk and orange juice. He says, if a little has helped, more should be better still. I am a bear for punishment. He loved my grandfather. So then, oops, skipped ahead too far. In 1917, he went into the United States entered the Great War, and he went in active duty in the Army Medical Corps, and this is his order that he received. He was assigned to the Panama Canal Zone, and he worked in a hospital there. My grandmother went with him with their 2 small children, bless her heart, and they spent about 14 months there. He was in the hospital there, and he had other various duties in the Corps there. You saw the picture of him with his comrade in arms, the other doctors there. And in fact, I found letters in his files from some of those doctors saying, oh, I remember our time in Panama, and have you heard from so-and-so, and that kind of thing. By the fall of 1918, the war was winding down, and he was sent back to the States, and he spent some time at Fort Jackson in South Carolina taking a hospital administration course. And then he went to Plattsburgh, New York briefly, and then in February of 1919, he was given an honorable discharge. He left the Army, and then he spent a few weeks at a graduate course in Harvard Medical School. And then he came back to Tryon to resume his practice. And again, in Mom's words, in my mother's words, she said in 1910, and this was true in 1919 as well, she said there were no hospitals. Patients who had to be hospitalized were taken by wagon or train to the Steedley Infirmary in Spartanburg, where he served, by the way, as head of internal medicine for 2 years starting in 1919. So his experience in the war had really changed and developed his focus for his practice. And in a speech he gave a few years later, I think it was in 1932, there was no date on it, but I'm pretty sure that was what it was. He wrote about the impetus for the next few years of his practice. And this is what he said to the Rotary Club. He said, experience in the World War created a desire for better types of service than was possible during my first 7 years in Tryon. That made me see the value of a well-organized hospital in a community. In fact, service without a hospital seemed intolerable. My experience up to that time had been principally along the lines of internal medicine, and in order to successfully serve this community, it was necessary to associate with me a surgical ability, and this was in the person of Alan Jerby. Okay, you remember Dr. Jerby who referred to as Hayward. And he says, together we demonstrated to this community the need of a first-class hospital. So in 1920, he brings Dr. Alan Jerby and his family, he had 3 children, to Tryon. And this was no small move for the Jerbys. Dr. Jerby already had a surgical practice in Charleston. He was teaching at the medical college there. So it was a big deal. But on the other hand, during the influenza epidemic in 1918, he had contracted influenza, and it had really badly affected him. Apparently, he spent time in a tubercular hospital for a while, and so I think it wasn't a hard sell to get him to come to Tryon for the better climate. And I'm guessing also that my grandfather did a great job convincing him of what could happen. I don't have any correspondence between them, but according, again, to Dr. Bob, who's telling us about this, some things about my grandfather, they were friends. They were good friends. Dr. Jerby was about 3 or 4 years older than my grandfather. They both went to the same medical college. They were both from the Charleston area. And I think they were very good friends. And I'm thinking that my grandfather probably sold to him the idea of this first-class hospital, you know, what they could do, the potential, I'm thinking Dr. Jerby saw, as well as my grandfather, of what they could do together to bring, you know, modern medicine, modern practices, a modern building to this community. Well, Dr. Jerby came in 1920, and he hit the ground running with my grandfather. By 1922, they had established the Tryon Infirmary. Bertha Blomfield Brown, which some of you longtime Tryonites will remember her, or her name at least, she wrote a history in 1986 of St. Luke's, a short history. And the way she put it was this. She said, when Dr. Jerby and Dr. Palmer realized that they could not continue forever doing emergency operations on kitchen tables. Imagine the surgeon from Charleston clearing off the kitchen table to do a surgery. they rented Miss Annie Ravenel's boarding house, and they called it the Tryon Infirmary. And if you remember, that was where DuBose Hayward was staying, was in Miss Annie Ravenel's boarding house. It was somewhere on Gottschalk Hill, I'm not sure where. This was not an autocratic move on my grandfather's part, because she was also a Palmer from South Carolina. And I told you, we're related to more than half of South Carolina, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, they took over, they rented her boarding house, took it over, and within a couple of years, they persuaded the owner of a new building on Trade Street, says Ms. Brown, to add a second floor for the infirmary. And this is the building where the old Owens Pharmacy, the empty Owens Pharmacy is. So they built a second floor to that, and that became the Tryon Infirmary. This gave them offices and 12 rooms for a hospital, with 1 graduate nurse and 2 practical nurses in attendance. Ms. Ravenel continued to cook and deliver meals, although my mother says that at some point they acquired a kitchen, and Cousin Annie, as she referred to her, Cousin Annie no longer delivered meals to the infirmary. So it was a start, but this was not yet the first-class hospital that my grandfather had envisioned. They wanted something even better. And so they went for community support, which they found in part in the persons of the Embry siblings. So Edmund Embry knew a corporate lawyer in New York, and he wrote a letter to the lawyer. And he asked the lawyer, what is the best form of organization for a hospital in a small town like Tryon? And he asked, what kind of board of trustees do we do? This was in January of 1924. So the Tryon Infirmary had only been running for 2 years, and they're already thinking down the road about the hospital. So he's asking about the new board. His sister, Miss Lucy Embry, also had received excellent care at the hands of Dr. Jervey, and she was very impressed with him and loved the idea of this hospital. When she died in 1927, she bequeathed land for the hospital to the 2 doctors in trust. And the only stipulation she had was that it be named after St. Luke, who was a physician. So they determined after she died that really the land wasn't suitable for building the hospitals, but they were able to sell it for $10,000. And between that and the equipment that they already had at the Tryon Infirmary, they had some assets. And they were, as I say, building community support as well. And they were able to apply to the Duke Endowment for funding as well. And I found, get used to this. Okay, I found a letter from Bishop Frank Hale Tourette, who was a retired bishop. He was a Episcopal bishop. He had retired here from Idaho. He spent half the year here and half the year in Nantucket. And he was very interested in the whole idea of a hospital and funding for it. And so he took it upon himself to write to Dr. Rankin, who was their contact with the Duke Foundation. And he asked him, he says, when you were here, it was nice to see you and to talk with you, but I'm concerned about the amount of funding that you're talking about giving us. He said, you're talking about for every $2 that we raise, you'll give us $1. He said, that's not going to be enough. How about 1-to-1? And in a whole separate paragraph in his letter, he says, what is your reaction to this letter? And he further adds, he says, I'm writing as a most interested observer of this whole enterprise and without having consulted the physicians, the campaign committee, or anyone else in Tryon. So Bishop Tourette was going rogue here. But he got an answer pretty quickly, immediately really, from Dr. Rankin at the Duke Endowment, who said pretty much, no, sorry, we can't do that. He said, we've already got more applications than we expected, asking for more money than we have to give out. We're going to have to trim back as it is. And he says, and by the way, he says, by the way, we don't have an application from Tryon. He says, I would suggest that Dr. Palmer get his application in shape as soon as possible and submit it. So I think my grandfather did, because they did get funding from the foundation. I'm not sure if it was as much as the bishop wanted, but anyway, they did get the funding. And as Granddaddy said later in his Rotary speech, he said, together he and Dr. Derby, demonstrated to the community the need of a first-class hospital. The community rose to the occasion and have constructed and equipped as fine a little general hospital to be found in the country. By means of this hospital and its various cooperative organizations, the field of the medical man in this community has been broadened to the point where its scope exceeds that of any other small community in this or any other state. He was very proud of this hospital, very proud. It was established in, as I say, in 1929. And they needed items for the hospital. I found this list of furniture required for St. Luke's Hospital. And it's really interesting. They have beds and bedside tables and rugs, bureaus, bedside lights. And you see something else from the times of those days. The private rooms, they needed 12 beds, so maybe Bishop Tourette did get his funding. I don't know. There's a lot of private beds. 10 for the white wards and 4 for the colored wards. So there was segregation in the hospital. That was, like I say, part of the times. Just as a side note, Dr. Bob told us that Granddaddy did have a lot of black patients in the community. He had a segregated waiting room, as many did in those days, but all that was changing by the time that young Dr. Palmer, Dr. Robert Palmer, came to Tryon. So anyway, in any case, St. Luke's doors opened in November of 1929. And probably you've all driven by it on Carolina Drive. And this land, by the way, was donated by Dr. Jerby, who had bought a whole bunch of land when he, where Jerby Road is, basically a lot of that land around Jerby Road. And he gave the land that the hospital is on to the hospital. So, and that's what it looked like. You can see all those beds and bedside tables and things that they bought from that list. Well, of course, this was November of 1929, and we all know what happened in October of 1929. It turns out it was a terrible time to open up a hospital. And the struggle for survival began for the hospital. Tryon Infirmary already had its share of debtors. This is from my grandfather's debtors back in 1927 from the Tryon Infirmary. I've blocked out the names, but you can see their occupations. Fireman, sawmill worker, mechanic, laundryman, farmer, laborer, carpenter, cotton mill worker. And they were from all over the area, including out of the county, East Flat Rock, Gaffney. And the amounts that they were outstanding was anywhere from $15 up to $160, all for a total of almost $1,600 just to my grandfather. And this was in 1927 and before the stock market crashed. So it was a tough time. I don't have anything specifically that tells about St. Luke's, debts or anything like that. But if you extrapolate from my grandfather's experience, you can know that it was dire in the hospital. I found letters from him to companies to whom he owed money, like medical supply companies. He had a lot of letters asking to borrow on life insurance policies, on his kids or on himself. He was scrambling for money. He took did what he could for reducing the cost for his services. These are letters where he's telling people he's cut their bill in half. And the second letter, in fact, he says, well, I cut your bill in half. It was $32, now it's $16. I've sent you the same letter like 4 or 5 times, he says. And I guess you haven't answered it because you can't pay. And, well, if you can pay, please do. I mean, he sounds really forlorn at this point. And this was the way it was back then. He had some patients who replied to him with their own stories, and they were really sad. And this one patient who had seen him and then went on to Winston-Salem, this is July of 1930, I regret very much that you had to write me about the bill I owe you. I thought I would have done settle with you and others that I owe there in Tryon meeting, but I just haven't had the money. I've been more harder pressed since I've been here than ever I've been in my life. I hardly get enough to live on and care for my family. We have to eat, and that is about all we are doing. There was another letter, where did it go? From a woman in Landrum, and this is also from July 1930, and she says, "Dear Dr. Palmer, I am indeed sorry if you think we don't intend to pay the balance of our hospital bill. There is no use for you to remind me that I promised to pay. We still mean to pay when we can spare the money. We've had other sickness since I saw you last. I will repeat, there is no use to send collectors to me. We have not got the cash now, but we will pay when we get it. You may write us as often as you wish, but it will not help us get the money." So, as I have said before, you may rest assured that you will get your money when we have it for you. It sure hurts me to owe something I can't pay. There's a lot of pain in that. So this is the way things were for folks in that time. What happened there? My mother talked about how he was paid. Sometimes it was in molasses. She could not stand to eat molasses when she was an adult because she said we had it all the time. My daddy was paid in molasses. They sometimes paid in moonshine. She talks about a time when she answered the door and a man was standing there with a burlap sack, and he said, "Is the doc in?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Well, here, tell him we brought him some medicine," and there were 3 fruit jars of moonshine in there. He liked the moonshine of Dark Corners, by the way, she says. Also, sometimes he was paid in kind with labor of different kinds. For example, Frank Arthur, who's one of the Tryon woodworkers of the time, he had done some of the trim work at St. Luke's at the hospital. He carved these beautiful fireplace pieces that framed my grandfather's fireplace in his house. And my siblings and I all own those pieces, and they're really lovely. They're in the style, like I say, of the Tryon woodworker kinds of things. And my grandfather ends his speech, or close to the end of his speech, he says, "In the past 6 months, we have afforded over 1,000 free bed days to the sick and suffering of this community. I am proud to have had a part in this." So even though he wasn't getting paid, he was very proud of what they were doing. "And I hope to see this place grow into a health center equivalent to its natural and climatic advantages." But, you know, a hospital can't run on moonshine and molasses. And it was in danger of shutting down by 1933, but by 1935, several donors in the community had come together and they contributed enough to keep the hospital up and running. And, you know, we still have St. Luke's in the community now, almost 100 years later. Of course, it's not called St. Luke's anymore. And I'm sure Miss Lucy is spinning in her grave over that one. And it's got a much larger organizational structure, too, than Edmund Emery or my grandfather could have imagined. He had other roles as a doctor. He was the federal prison physician, which meant that if a U.S. Marshal brought a prisoner into the Polk County Jail, he could tend to his medical needs. He was on the Selective Service Board for a long time, examining draftees. And he was a medical examiner for insurance companies. He was also the county health officer, and as such, he organized tonsil and adenoid clinics for school children. He did obstetric and pediatric clinics as well. If you had a problem with the town of Tryon sewer line stripping in your yard, you got in touch with my grandfather. Some things don't change, I think.
Yeah.
And then there was the case of the notorious leper John Early, who he issued an order to send John Early back to the institution in Louisiana where he had come from. That is a really long and really sad story, and I'm not going to go into it here, but if you want to take me out to dinner sometime, I can tell you a really fascinating story about John Early, the notorious leper. So the last thing I wanted to share with you, I haven't forgotten, okay, is this. This again is from the Tryon Daily Bulletin. And this picture actually came out after his obituary was printed. You can see he was buried Thursday. And this is again Mr. Vining Sr. saying, at the request of many readers, the bulletin is reproducing the above picture of Dr. Marion Sharini Palmer, who passed away Tuesday morning. No picture for the bulletin was available in time for the funeral service. The above picture was made originally by Barber of Hendersonville. It was too valuable to mail away. In the emergency, this was an emergency, they didn't have a picture. Bob Erskine of Tryon made a picture of the photograph, and that was sent to the bulletin's engraver in Spartanburg. Hundreds of former patients of Dr. Palmer can now have a newspaper picture of him in their home. That's sweet. They say Dr. Palmer meant so much to them and that he was one of their best friends. His loyalty, faithfulness, and untiring efforts to help his patients endeared him to all of them. So that is my part of the talk, and I'm going to hand it back to Strat.
Thanks, Ellen. That's great. I give Ellen full credit for getting me to do this. And all right, so let me go back to mine here. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is his business efforts, his land that he owned, and sort of his civic participation. So again, quoting Mr. Vining, he was forward-looking in developing the civic and business interests in the community. He was first to see the possibilities of a lake on Vaughn Creek, which became Lake Lanier, and we have not much in his papers about that. There are some letters about various pieces of real estate up in there, but that's about all we've got on that. But apparently he was a big push. That was part of his push to make this community grow and make it grow in a certain way. I won't go back through the list of various offices he did. There's the office that he built on Packwood Street in 1950, which is still there. He had offices with several other doctors in town at various times. Now, he was a businessman too, and as Ellen said, he was short on cash, and he had to branch out a bit, but he had good instincts for it. And this is quoting from Uncle Marion's diary. It said his father's boy, he took over the fish business from his brother O'Ree, who was not doing so well with the business. And fresh strings of fish came in by train, and he would shout out loud and clear, "Fresh fish, 25 cents a string." And his first customer would get the best string. And so that gave them incentive to show up early and get his fish, So he, before long, he had a thriving business. This was in the 1890s. Now, he wasn't just a businessman. He was also pretty aware, pretty savvy about the business climate, as people were in those days. And he had a little bit of correspondence with Governor Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, the fall of August of 1932, when Roosevelt was running for president. And the basis of it was, accurate but not particularly deep economic analysis of what was going on. He was saying, look, the banks are not lending money, and they're not lending money in particular on real estate. He said, now you got to do something to get them to let us unlock the wealth that people hold in real estate. It's really more of a liability to hold real estate than it is to have an asset. And the thing I liked about this letter in particular is he related it to his primary business, which was being a doctor. And it says it is just as necessary to have money in circulation in the business world as it is to have blood circulating in the human body. Without this circulation in the human body, the brain and other cells die. Without the circulation of money in the business world, death likewise results. I'm a trained economist, and I have nothing to argue with about that. And neither did Franklin Roosevelt. He wrote back and said, I quite agree with you, but as I see it, this is only one phase of a problem that extends into many other fields besides that of real estate. In other words, the banks are not lending to anybody on any kind of collateral. It's not just real estate. Now, why was he particularly interested in real estate? Well, Granddaddy loved land. He loved to own land. And again, quoting from Uncle Marion, he said, my father had as much as 5,000 acres of land in the Brights Creek watershed. I think in order to get to 5,000, you probably have to count the 600 acres he had on Tryon Peak. He owned pretty much everything between Sunset Rock and Rixhaven, as well as the cliffs on the front and a bunch of land on the back side, which included an asbestos mine, and that's a whole other story. This property was put together over a period of years from the 1920s to the 1950s. Some of this land was bought for as little as $1 an acre, but the average price, according to Uncle Marion, was around $30 per acre. My father had the gift of being able to buy land at a reasonable price. And I like this next part. When he obtained the land, it became more valuable in his mind, so he was a much better buyer than a seller. So his land, for the most part, stayed intact until after his death in 1958, much to my parents' chagrin, because they had to sell it off. But at any rate, Cliffield Farm in particular out there, which is now, a portion of it has become the Brights Creek development. Let's see, control. Let me zoom in on this just a little bit. Yeah, it was just so beautiful. I did a lot of my growing up on this piece of land. You can see here's the farmhouse and a garage, and up there is Cliffield Mountain. Those are the cliffs on Cliffield Mountain. They own the whole valley. Uncle Marion's part was about 1,200 acres at the beginning, and there was another 2,200 acres or so besides that my mother and her mother inherited. So anyway, now why did he buy this land? Well, partly again because he just loved land. He loved to hunt. He loved to get out, hike, and ride his horse and buggy. This is the farmhouse. There's Aunt Jean out in front of it, he also saw it though as a way to provide for his family and provide for the future of his family. And indeed, that's where Aunt Jean and Uncle Marion lived for many years. Now, he also bought, he was one of the people who pushed the telephone company, who organized the telephone company, and he owned about a third of it as of 1950 or so. But why telephone company? Well, again, it's family. My dad was from Albany, New York, and he had a business degree from the University of Michigan, and he worked for the New York State Telephone Company. He worked for, it was a Bell System company. And so, he had the right skill set to run a small telephone company. And so Granddaddy held on to it. That's the five of us. There's Ellen looking at Mom, and there's the executive director of the Fine Arts Center there. There's your Episcopal minister there. I'm probably picking my nose, I don't know. But anyway, this was the Douglas family. And so he was able to bring us here. And it wasn't just for us. He wanted Mom in town, because the two of them were really, they were just like this. They were very similar in temperament, and he trusted her. And he trusted her to take care of her mother and to take care of her sister, who was disabled. And so he wanted them here. And by God, he got him here. And so anyway, Dad ran the Thermal Belt Telephone Company and throughout my youth. Again, there's Molly and Ben. Ben's got his sailor hat on. Okay, yeah, good. So, his personal life and character. He liked to have fun. He wasn't just a server of the community. He was a guy who enjoyed his life. He was active in hunting, golf. I found an article in the bulletin where he was organizing a baseball team. He liked to play poker, other sociable activities. There he is with his hunting dog, Dan. I don't know which dog that is, but they're all named Dan. They're all named Dan. Again, a great quote from Uncle Marion. He said, "My mother was always on time. My father, time did not count too much for him. My father was good on telling jokes. He was a good person for golf, hunting, and poker. He was a dedicated doctor. My mother and father did a good job raising 3 children." So, he had his whimsical side to him. There he is playing poker, and Uncle Marion helpfully wrote who the men were around the table. This was at the farm in 1950. This is a guy, Tom Costa. I don't know, I would like to know who he is. Second one is Ernest Kerhulis. His boy back there, yeah. His grandson is in the audience here today, and it's great to know. Philip's my age, and it feels good to know that our grandfathers were friends too. But at any rate, and of course, Mr. Kerhulis did contribute so much to this town with the tea house and the Sunnydale and all the wonderful children and grandchildren that he gave the town. So anyway, and then that's Uncle Marion is next, and then Granddaddy is kind of in the back with a tie on, and then I don't know, Uncle Marion's writing is not too good, but that guy's name is Furby or something. And he says the picture was taken by Dr. Alan Jervey. And it's not a very good picture, but let's see, how are we doing on time? Well, I got a little time, good. Mom told a story about him doing timed races around, he said they started the railroad track. This was before Chestnut Street was paved, and before any of these streets were paved. And he and Mr. Bacon, that would be F.P. Bacon, who started the Southern Mercerizing and did a lot of other stuff around here. Mr. Hester, that would probably be Julian Hester, probably not Waverly Hester, I think. Anyway, he was an important developer in the area. Anyway, they got in their cars and they'd let the air out of the tires some so that they would get better traction, and they race around up Chestnut and over up Melrose Avenue and down Packwood Street and around. And they didn't get arrested. Probably should have, but at any rate, that was fun. And there he is on his horse. Okay, so what was his reputation? Well, he was definitely an honest guy, right? That's clear from a lot of things. One piece of evidence is that we have a lot of letters where people are writing to him saying, I got this piece of land in Tryon in Polk County and I'm trying to sell it. Do you know anybody? Can you help me sell it? Now, he's not a realtor, but people trusted him to help them out. And they also helped them, they would ask him to find a place to live as well. And then there's this story that we heard as kids, because, again, he really admired my mother, and my mother just thought he hung in the moon. But she liked to tell this story about how he saw somebody cheating in class at the medical school, and he stood up and pointed at the guy and said, he's cheating. And the guy, of course, didn't like that, and he challenged him to fisticuffs, as they called it back then. Anyway, they had seconds and everything. They went out behind the stadium at the Porter Military Academy, and according to Dr. Palmer, the whole town of Charleston came out. But according to this professor that Mom ran into like 30 years later at a party, who retold the story to, said, yeah, it was the whole medical school turned out to watch the fight. And Granddaddy was a smaller guy, but he was, I guess, quicker, and he'd been fighting with his brothers and sisters all his life, and so he won the fight, and then he went on to establish an honor system at the Medical School of South Carolina. And he never ever hesitated to write something he thought was wrong. And again, I can so see that in my mother. You know, it's like, I can attest to this because that was the way she was. You know, if something was right, it was right. If it was wrong, and you're going to pay. I mean, it's like, there's not a lot of gray in the world. And they also had intense loyalty to friends and family and community. One thing that indicated, I found the list of pallbearers. You know, of course, Seth Feinig Sr., there's 6 doctors: Welburn, Woody, Bob Palmer, Dr. McCall. We have the children of Dr. McCall in the audience here. Actually, how many people out there were delivered by Granddaddy? Okay, we got 3. We got 3. 2 McCalls and. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if Holland Brady was delivered by him, but he was delivered in the hospital. He was the first baby delivered in their infirmary. Anyway, and he had lots of other influential friends as well. But he had his share of rivals and a few enemies too. We used to hear those stories. I won't tell those today. But he did battle with them very enthusiastically, I can tell you that. But at any rate, you know, and personally, I had a summer job at Hatch Mill in Columbus in 1974. And I was, you know, a college kid, summer job. And when I first got there, of course, people were nice to me because people are nice, but they didn't really have much use for me until the word got around that I was Dr. Palmer's grandson. And that just changed everything. You know, especially the older folks, they would come up to me and they'd say, he delivered my children, or he delivered me, or one guy, I remember why he cut on my wife once, and he did it in a good way. And so he may have been pals with the elite, but he served everyone, and he earned their admiration. Now, I want to close talking about the water wheel, okay? He had a hydropower water wheel. It's still there. You can go see it if you drive out, go out to Lake Adger, take a left, go out towards the development. Palmer Road. It's on the right. By the way, there's Palmer Street, too, in town. And there's Palmer Road. There's Derby Palmer Road, too. Anyway, it's there on the right, just before the Brights Creek. It was 28 feet in diameter. It had a quarter-mile long penstock, you know, flume carrying water from a dam on Brights Creek. And it would flow over the top of there and make the, you know, it would spin, and then they had a generator in that house there. It was built starting in 1948. The Rutherford Electric Co-op finally got a line out there in 1956. So, you know, he was proud of it. There was a Charlotte Observer article in 1963 about it, and, you know, it's an interesting article. Uncle Marion said his father spent about $30,000 on this electrical system over a period of about 8 years. Now, I looked up the CPI in that year, and now multiply by 13, okay? And that's today's dollars. what he spent on it. Aunt Jean, who had an interesting relationship with the doctor, she said, no, I think he spent more than that. And she said, I kept books on it up to $25,000. Then the doctor said, just forget about keeping the books any longer. And she was not that impressed with it. It was kind of like an episode of Green Acres. It was, she had to call down to the tenant farmer's house when she wanted to iron and get them to turn off all the lights so that there'd be enough power for her to run her iron. But, you know, he kept trying on it, and as Uncle Marion said, my father was a man who liked to see things through. And you could hear that wheel for miles when it was going to be cold. As Aunt Jean used to like to say, the mountaineers used to say, it's going to be cold. I can hear Doc Palmer's water wheel. So, anyway, so you can call it an impractical boondoggle, and I would, born of a stubborn, naive optimism. But in many ways, that water wheel on Brights Creek is emblematic of his legacy. Yeah, like the water wheel, his medical practice, land deals, business deals, and public service all were visionary, they were progressive, they were relentlessly pursued, they were kind of magnificent in their way, and always aimed at protecting, serving, and nurturing his community and his family. And he also liked to have fun. So again, thanks to everybody who helped with this presentation, especially Dr. Bob. Okay, I probably should have unplugged this. There we go. Yes.
Did he have a fee schedule that you're aware of, what he's charging for office visits and that kind of thing?
What do you remember about that, Ellen?
I didn't see a fee schedule.
Go ahead.
Okay. I didn't see a fee schedule in any of that. We had these papers in the banker's box, and it had just all kinds of stuff that my mother had never thrown away after he died. And this box traveled, I think, to Strat's house. It went to Marion's house. It ended up at my house. Anyway, looking through all these files, I didn't see anything like a fee structure. Mom said in her account that I think he charged 25 cents for an office visit or something in the early 1900s, something like that. So that's about all I know about his fees.
And a lot of those letters were, you know, really owe me $4.
Yeah.
And please.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, it was, and I remember looking, he had a book, and I remember seeing like, you know, in a month he would have maybe $20, $40, something like that as revenue.
Yeah, oh, one thing I forgot to mention was that Mom said he never charged the clergy, the relatives, or there was somebody else that he didn't ever charge, but so, you know, he lost some money that way too.
But he had enough money to buy land.
But he did, yeah. Although he was always borrowing more, I think.
Yeah, he borrowed a lot to buy the telephone company.
Yeah. Yes?
How did the people up in the mountain hollows contact him when they needed?
How did they contact him? I have no idea. I don't know. That was a really good question. They must have been in pretty bad shape.
That's why I bought the telephone company.
What did you say, Mary?
That's why I bought the telephone company.
That's why
Probably send a runner most of the time.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yes?
Do you have any primary source documents detailing the hysteria in Tryon?
No, I do not. That would be really interesting to find out that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yes, Bill?
I just want to make one comment. He's one of the men that I respected more than anybody in the whole town, especially since he delivered me. Didn't know but he was a wonderful guy. But when I was a child, a young child, we lived on Warrior Mountain Road out in the valley. And if I was sick or something like that, he would do a house call. As much as I love Dr. Palmer, he would come to the house and he'd say, Billy, you're sick, I'm gonna take care of it. Turn over on your stomach, pull down your pants, I'm gonna give you a shot. You're gonna roll me over and shoot me in the butt. You never forget that. You never forget that. As a wrestling man, struck terror into my heart occasionally.
Your dad struck terror.
We can tell you But one other distinguishing feature of his practice was when he would give smallpox inoculations, he made a great big, what we call boo-boos, the little scars that were left of the, and his nurse, Nancy McLeod, I remember she was giving me vaccination or some kind of shot later on when I was a teenager. She said, "Oh yeah, your grandfather gave you that one."
Do you have any idea what happened to your Uncle Marion's golf club?
Well, that's a good question. I think you, Marion and Mike would probably know.
Yeah, I bet they can.
Yeah, they would probably know because they were in town. We were out of town at the time he passed.
He played at NC State.
Yes, he did.
And I played a good bit of golf with him.
Did you?
Did you?
He was.
And he used that same old golf bag, I think he had, and to my knowledge, he never bought a new club.
Oh no, yeah, he had the first dollar he ever earned, but I used to caddy for him. It's $1.25, you know, and that was all your debt. And he, what was I going to say? Oh well, anyway, yeah, he was club champion in 1941. He was club champion in 1980. And yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming out for this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, both. I know everybody enjoyed this. We learned a lot.